Hey everybody, welcome back to Serial Killer Saturdays here on Cowboy Criminology. I'm your host, Gerard Judd. Of course, I am the Cowboy Criminologist. All right, so we're in part 5 now of the Gerard John Schaefer Jr. Case, and we've gotten to the point where he's now abducted and murdered Susan Place and her friend Georgia Jessup. Okay. Uh, Their abduction took place in September, and we're fast forwarding now to September 1972. It's now March 1973. Okay. I just want to pause and reflect on something that I said in the last video. And I told you I was going to talk to y'all about how the criminal mind kind of processes risk and reward. All right. Now, if you talk to most philosophers, psychologists, psychiatrists, even criminologists, they will tell you that human beings will make decisions based on perceived risk and reward. So generally, things are considered high risk, high reward, and that takes some thought and some planning. And there are things that are low risk, low reward that take very little to no planning. For example, you come out of work one night and the parking lot is completely abandoned. You are literally the last one there, and 3 parking spaces down, you happen to notice a little piece of paper blowing in a little dust devil. You walk over there and you pick up a $10 bill. All right, right now in this economy, a $10 bill not going to take you very far, but it's better than poking the eye with a sharp stick. Okay, so you risked very little walking over there and picking up a $10 bill. So you can consider that to be high risk or low risk, low reward, depending on how you view a $10 bill. For some of you, for some people, $10 would be like, woohoo, $10. And for some people, it's like, yeah, $10. Anyway, but that would be an example, low risk, low reward. Now, let's look at high risk, high reward. So somebody was to come to you in the 1990s and tell you, hey, I've got an idea for a business. And with a $10,000 investment on your part, I can make you a millionaire in less than a decade. Well, what happens if this folds, this fails? Well, you lose your $10,000. It's not a low risk proposition. Especially when you consider how many businesses in not just America, but the world fail within the first 6 months to 3 years. So if you happen to be one of those lucky few who invested $10,000 in the 1990s to a man named Jeff Bezos, you are probably knocking on hundreds of millions of dollars if you had caught that investment. That would be high risk, high reward. So how do we get to that point? Well, there's 3 things that we look for, and it kind of looks like a mathematical equation, but it's rationalization, neutralization equals justification. Okay. So the thought gets implanted in somebody's mind. I'm going to take a certain action. Okay. What's the rationalization for taking that action? It can be whatever fits the scenario, and I'll plug it in here in just a second. Then you have the neutralization. You have something that neutralizes that act. And if you can rationalize it, why you're going to do it, and you can neutralize it, which basically reinforces your rationalization, you can justify why you're going to do it. That is the criminal thought process model. So take a first-time juvenile offender who's tagging, spraying graffiti, small property damage, things like that. So the rationalization goes, I want to make my mark. I want to do something so that people know I'm here. I'm going to take something because I want it. That's the rationalization. Neutralization. Let's say theft is involved. I'm going to steal something from a store. I'm going to steal something specifically from a large big box store. Okay. Well, it's a corporate organization. They make billions of dollars a year. They're not going to miss this one thing. Okay. So in their mind, they're not hurting anybody. It's a corporation. The corporation's insured. The corporation makes billions of dollars. So there's no reason for them not to take it. But then they start thinking, okay, well, what if I get in trouble? Well, I'm under 18. I have no criminal record. So even if I get caught, the charges probably aren't going to be that serious. Now they have justification. So rationalization, neutralization, justification. And that thought process goes on and on. Now let's look at a more experienced criminal. Say you have somebody who wants to rob convenience stores, and their rationalization is similar to the youthful offender. Okay, well, it's a corporation. The money I'm taking from the register, it belongs to the corporation. It doesn't belong to the clerk. It doesn't belong to any of the customers. So there's no reason for anybody to get involved. The money's insured. I'll get the money. I'll be out the door. The justification for that is that the money belongs to the corporation. The corporation is a faceless entity, and the money's insured. Okay. Now, what if the clerk resists? Well, if the clerk resists, the rationalization is it's not their money, so they shouldn't want to protect it. The neutralization is if they put themselves in that situation where they're making me act, well, then whatever happens to them is on them, not on me. There's the justification. And it snowballs like that usually until an offender gets caught. Gerard John Schaefer is no different. And if you remember the first or second video, I talked about the very thing he despised about his victims was his perception of them as prostitutes, as being promiscuous, as being easy, as having no virtue, and by his definition, no worth. Okay. Remember, Schaefer thought his mother was just the ideal Catholic woman, and any woman who would lower herself to being used, to allowing themselves to be used by men, basically they had no right to exist. Okay. Interestingly enough, we know he targeted at least one prostitute. He liked kidnapping he liked stalking hitchhikers, getting them into his vehicle, and he did that because he enjoyed the easy target. A hitchhiker's going to get into a car with anybody who's going to stop, really. And in his mind, it's like, if you're going to put yourself in this position, this is on you. Whatever happens to you is justified, because if you hadn't gotten into this car, you wouldn't be in this position now. Okay. So Gerard John Schaefer is a great case study for understanding the criminal mind: rationalization, neutralization, justification. Okay. So like I said, we're 6 months down the road, March 1973, and Lucille Place, Susan Place's mother, is beside herself. I mean, as any parent would be. I cannot even pretend to imagine the guilt that Lucille must have to think that she allowed this to happen to her daughter. So she's talked to the police and nothing has happened. There's still no sign of her daughter, Susan, or her friend Georgia. Like many victims of violent crime who don't get answers, something comes over these individuals and they turn into detectives. And it's interesting to see because a lot of the things that these individuals do are not only consistent with police work, but consistent with really good police work. So I'm going to talk to you about what Lucille did. So Lucille decides that she's going to go and she's going to check Susan's room. She's going to look for any clues to where she might be. So in this case, she's looking through diaries, paper, she's looking through all the drawers, anything she can think of. What do you know? She finds a letter, and the letter is written from a guy named Jerry Shepard. Now, Jerry Shepard is the same name that Gerard John Schaefer gave when they met. A stroke of good fortune. She doesn't just find the letter, she finds the envelope that has Jerry Shepard's address on it. And the address was 333 Martin Avenue in Stewart. Now, if you remember, Stewart is where Trotter and Wells were kidnapped from and, taken to where they were abducted and everything. Of course, this is in Martin County. So she's like, you know what? The address is probably fake. Okay. But I'm going to chase it down anyway. So she goes to the address, finds out it's an apartment complex. She goes in, she talks to the apartment manager, she explains her situation, and the apartment manager is just kind of sitting there with a very blank look on his face. Because in his mind, he's thinking, this cannot be the same guy. This cannot be the same guy. This cannot be the same guy. And then she says he was driving a 69 blue Datsun, and he goes by the name Jerry Shepard. So the apartment manager says, well, I don't know a Jerry Shepard, but I know a Gerard Schaefer. And Gerard Schaefer was arrested just last year for abducting 2 girls while he was working as a deputy sheriff. So this could potentially have been the end of the story, but Lucille pressed on. So now Lucille's not only armed with an address, and after giving a description, the apartment manager's like, I'm pretty sure this is the same guy. So Lucille, as she's getting ready to get back in her car, she's checking out the license plates, and she realizes that all of the registered vehicles for Martin County begin with 44. Well, in Pinellas County, where she was living, all of the license plates started with a single 4. And this caused some confusion. Because now she's thinking, okay, did I give the license plate wrong? Was the license plate written down wrong? Because nothing came back. Okay. Today, when law enforcement conducts a license plate search, I know several times when I was working on my own, the in-car computer just went crazy, flashing lights, signals, one thing or another. it was sending out messages that I was with a stolen vehicle, one thing or another. And usually it was the same license plate number from a different jurisdiction. I'd run a license plate from Texas, but the numbers matched a similar plate out of another state. And so I had to look really carefully. I'm trying to think. Uh, I think I only actually encountered one stolen vehicle and uh, one where the vehicle had actually been used in a crime and the suspect was actually in the vehicle. That was an awkward traffic stop uh, for so many reasons. But you know what? That's a different tale for a different day. So, armed with this information and knowing that she has the license plate of that 69 Datsun written down right, she goes to Martin County. And she says, "Hey, I've got kind of a wild story to tell y'all." And the sheriff and the other deputies are like, "After the year we've had, we don't doubt it. What do you got? Nothing can be any more ridiculous than what we've been through over the last year." You talk about your hold my beer moments. Well, this is it. So she explains what had happened, talks about Jerry Shepard, describes him, and then she said, "I went to 333 Martin Avenue here in Stewart," and everybody's like, "Yeah, we're pretty familiar with that address." And they said, "Let us show you a picture." So they show a personnel picture of Gerard John Schaefer, and she said, "That's the guy who introduced himself as Jerry Shepard." So now he's connected to another abduction. All right. Um, Keep in mind, he's still out on bond. He hasn't even been tried. So April 1st, father and son are out looking for cans. They're going to do some recycling. And they come across some skeletal remains. Now, these remains are only 6 miles from where Trotter and Wells had been held. The remains, the heads had been decapitated. You could see where the spinal cords had been severed. There were gouge marks in the tree from where Place and Jessup had been restrained. So they call law enforcement. Law enforcement comes out, and of course, this is starting to look very, very, very familiar, hauntingly familiar. Okay. So what makes this so horrible is that there was a lack of erosion for the two shallow graves that have been dug, which meant that someone or something had been coming and disturbing the dirt and putting it back, disturbing the dirt and putting it back. We're going to talk about that here in a minute too. Okay. Um, there was clothing found in the area, and one of the articles was a pair of blue jeans that had a Roadrunner, a Looney Tune cartoon patch on it. So very distinctive. Not just not just a brand or a pair of jeans that one of the victims was known to wear, but something very distinctive, something that would make this stand out. Um, there was evidence that one of the victims had been shot up against the tree. The bullet was actually lodged in the jaw. So now, as law enforcement is searching this area of banyan trees and they're looking around and they're looking for evidence, they come across a set of initials. And if you guessed GJ, you were 100% right. So now, law enforcement kicks into high gear because they now have a specific person who is out on bond, who is known for committing this type of crime in this type of location under these type of circumstances. Y'all, if you think this story is weird now, we haven't even gotten to the weird part yet. All right, so let that sink in. So, law enforcement gathers search warrants for Gerard John Schaefer's home and also his mother's home. And in his mother's home, or in his home, they don't find hardly anything. It's very innocuous. There's really nothing there at first glance. They go to his mother's house and they find writings. One in particular was called How to Get Away with Murdering Whores, Sluts, and Harlots. We had talked about two previous victims, Belinda and Carmen. Okay. And Carmen, if you'll remember, was wearing a black chiffon dress, and Gerard John Schaefer actually wrote a story called Black Chiffon Dress. And he talked about incredible detail of what he did to her. Okay. Now, I'm going to save you some of the more graphic things, but some of the other things that were found were jewelry. Lee Hainline, she had a necklace that said Lee. That necklace was found in Gerard John Schaefer's possessions. Madonna necklace, the religious figure, not the singer, that belonged to Briscolina. She was wearing that. That was found. When law enforcement searches a sexual sadist trophy room, for lack of a better term, they start to learn about what the sexual sadist, what their triggers are, the things that they enjoy, the things that turn them on, the things that they take. Now, Schaefer is the prime example of a collector. Jewelry, clothing, pictures, Polaroids. Okay, so I'm gonna read this off right quick. So he had pictures where some victims were obviously forced to be intoxicated. He wrote about that with Belinda and Carmen, causing them to urinate and defecate on themselves. He actually had pictures of himself tied up in the same area, wearing women's clothing. Like I said, for a sexual sadist, cross-dressing is not out of the norm. And interestingly enough, Schaefer was able to admit to being a cross-dresser out in the open to get out of being drafted into the military. And everybody's like, "Oh, that's a great dodge." And he's like, "Yeah, absolutely." And he's like, "Just don't pay any attention to my lingerie collection." So an attraction to somebody urinating or defecating, an attraction to somebody urinating is urolagnia. Coprophilia is, of course, when somebody defecates themselves. Now, remember we talked about the two shallow graves and how the dirt had looked like it had been disturbed. Come to find out that not only is he a sexual sadist, but he also engages in necrophilia, sex with dead people. Now, interestingly enough, not all sexual sadists are necrophiles. And let me explain this. So, a sexual sadist is aroused by the terror they inflict on their victim, the humiliation, the degradation. They want to make their victims feel as small as humanly possible. Now, a lot of times that fear is what causes arousal. Um, if you remember back to, if you're a Criminal Minds fan at all, and you remember uh, when the Reaper uh, found out where Hotch's ex-wife was hiding out, well, he wasn't a sexual sadist; he was just a sadist. But Hotch warns his wife not to scream, not to show any fear, because that's what he feeds on. Well, for a lot of sexual sadists, like Richard Cottingham, he was done with the torture and everything as soon as as soon as they were dead. He could no longer extract a reaction from them. He was done. He didn't care. There was nothing left for him to do to this victim, and the dismembering and stuff, that was more just because he could. Um, usually, it usually it's not really so much a. Let me rephrase. You've got to contextualize it in the form of the case, because sometimes missing fingers, missing hands, uh, missing teeth, a missing head can be the offender trying to conceal the identity of the individual. Sometimes they're trophies, like in the uh, Carol Bundy and the other Sunset Slayer. What was his name? Anyway, male female serial killer duo, and I'll figure out that name. It's really hard doing this off the cuff, especially when you have such a broad knowledge base of true crime. Anyway, Carol would take the heads for her lover so that he could make the heads perform orally on him, and Ted Bundy was known to do that as well. Uh, it's kind of interesting. Necrophilia is not unusual to serial killers, but it's a little more rare in the sexual sadist, because generally once they can no longer extract fear from their victim, they really don't have any use for them. So it's very interesting. What a serial killer collects. Um, One of the things that I was always trained to look for is to look through all of the visual materials, pictures, magazines, circulars, um, even even pornography. Okay. Now, if you think about the most hardcore pornography, there's very little that has there's very little that the imagination has to do to figure out what's going on, what the context is. For a sexual sadist, though, yeah, you're probably going to find that very hardcore, disturbing pornography, but you're also going to find softcore pornography, and you're going to find, generally, softcore pornography would be considered like Playboy, where it's a girl in her late teens, early 20s, and posing in various states of undress. Happen to be washing the car, without any clothes on, because who hasn't seen that happen in their neighborhood? All these weird scenes. But for a sexual sadist, they will take those more innocent images and they will add embellishments. Um, if a girl happens to be standing next to a tree, they might draw a noose around her neck. They might do things to make her appear dead. Uh, They might show bullet wounds. They might show different forms of torture that they want to inflict on this individual. Okay. Um, and generally when you see that, that is the sign that something is very, very off, and you need to you need to address that. Other things that are shown in these images, and even circulars just showing lingerie for sale at your local big box store, they'll draw in their own idea of bondage and what they'd want to do, how they'd want to torture this victim. Very often, you will find a preference for the victim type, height, weight, hair color, eye color, build. Uh, are they looking for? Do they have a specific type? No type? What have you? Um, Other things that they tend to collect are pictures from other collectors. He had a bunch of uh, Polaroid showing women being tortured to death that he exchanged with other people. A lot of the Polaroids that were recovered, victims were never able to be identified off of there. But I also said that he had pictures of himself dressed up as a woman, pseudo torturing himself, and that's not uncommon for a sexual sadist either, which is a little odd. Another thing that was found was a suede purse that belonged to one of the victims, and he had given that particular purse to his wife Teresa. That is also not uncommon. The things that serial killers keep for themselves have a lot of value. The things a serial killer gives to the people that are important to them in their life, it's a game. Every time they look at that purse, at that ring, at those earrings, at that necklace, that bracelet, whatever it is, they can sit there and they're constantly reliving the entire event because they know exactly where that came from. So I told you that Schaefer. Uh, well, let's take it from here. Okay, so Schaefer's arrested. He's incarcerated. This time, yeah, they're not even trying to talk to him about bond, and they start going to, or he starts saying that this is. At first, it's a case of mistaken identity. Martin County's just after me. Uh, people won't leave me alone. I made one mistake, and now they're trying to pin everything to me. Typical serial killer. Some other dude did it. All right. Um, Now, Terry, you asked a very interesting question, and I wanted so bad to answer in the comments section. I wanted so bad to answer in the comments section, but I couldn't. And I couldn't because I would bury the lead on why you'd never heard of Gerard John Schaefer. Now, every state, every portion of the state has their most well-known serial killer. Okay. Now, Gerard John Schaefer is incarcerated in Florida around 1974. I tried to get into a psychiatric hospital. Nobody was buying that he had any kind of mental illness. So he gets sent to the Florida State Penitentiary. Okay. Now, give me just 1 second because I want to make sure that I get this right. So, yeah, 1974, he's incarcerated. And Okay. February 1978. Okay, so Schaefer's a pretty big deal in Florida right now. All right, he's these crimes, these victims. The swamp's starting to give up their secrets. They're looking through the writings uh, that Schaefer has made, and they're thinking about these cases. They're looking at these victims. They're starting to realize not only is he a sexual sadist, he's a necrophile, he's a cross dresser, he has a vested interest in hardcore pornography. Um, they found firearms, knives, uh, hatchets, machetes. They found all kinds of things that could be tied to criminal activity, or at least would fit that. They found restraints. They found all kinds of stuff. Okay. Um, Now, sexual sadists, especially serial sexual sadists, love to document. They love collecting. They love documenting, and they can't help themselves. So just like Lucille Place was trying to figure out where her daughter could possibly be, investigators sitting there looking through all of Schaefer's writings would be astonished to learn about, well, anything they learned about him, because they will write down their fantasies. They will write down hit lists. They will write down everything. Okay. Schaefer gets to prison, and everybody realizes, okay, this guy's a pretty bad dude. He likes to torture people, but he's soft. He's doughy. He's really not anything to be feared. And like a lot of inmates, he does what he gets by does he does what he can to get by in prison, which I'm guessing, because of how things ended up, he either made himself out to be a way bigger deal than he actually was, and people got tired of him running his mouth, or he was found out to be involved in snitching off inmates for doing stuff they shouldn't have been doing. Interestingly enough, um, when Schaefer was sentenced, he got life in prison because at the time there was a moratorium on the death penalty. And when it was reinstated, he couldn't be retried and sentenced to death. But Lucille Place, with the help of Trotter and Wells, uh, their testimony helped make sure that he got life in prison, which was, when you learn about how he thinks about his victims, there's absolutely there's absolutely nothing on earth that could have been done to him that would have been horrible enough to inflict the same kind of terror that he did on his victims. So, fast forward, Gerard John Schaefer is kind of a big deal. He's a little puffy. And wouldn't you just know it, an ex-girlfriend comes back into his life, Sandra London. They had dated briefly in high school, and she comes to check up on him. Hey, how you doing? Well, they start this correspondence, semi-courtship kind of relationship. Now, I told y'all earlier that Sandra London is a very controversial figure in true crime. And a lot of people believe that Sandra London kind of exploited her former relationship with Schaefer in order to get him to open up and basically give his rights, uh, the rights to his life, to her, so that she can publish his words, one thing or another. Well, Sandra London and Gerard John Schaefer were actually sued by the state of Florida under Son of Sam statutes to keep that from happening. Now, uh, Son of Sam statutes basically say that if you are a notorious criminal, you cannot make money off the fact that you're a notorious criminal. So Gerard John Schaefer has this grandiose idea that he's going to start a brand new category of literature called killer fiction. And basically, this was his idea of, y'all are going to love this. It was basically his idea of writing down exploits and adventures that were all fantasy, dark fantasy. But in his mind, he was going to show people what it's like to be mentally ill. Well, he considered himself mentally ill because he was a sexual sadist. Interestingly enough, if you watch there's an interview of him. It's ridiculous. For about the first 5 minutes, I'm sitting there and I'm like, yeah, we get it. Your wife shacked up with your attorney. That's in bad form, but he said the relationship was pre-existing, and he has this idea that everybody's out to get him. Not uncommon for a serial killer who gets caught. It wasn't me. They're trying to pin this on me because of past actions. My wife and my attorney, the witnesses, everybody's conspiring against little old me just because, I'm this upstanding guy and, everybody just wants to take the good guy down. All this nonsense. Okay. So in killer fiction, he starts writing out little stories like the black chiffon dress. And I want to read something to y'all. This was a letter that he sent to Sandra London. Okay. When I nabbed Jessup in place, I'd been in the ghoul game for almost 10 years, so I knew what to expect from these juicy young creatures at the end. Doing doubles is far more difficult than doing singles, but on the other hand, it also puts one in a position to have twice as much fun. There can be some lively discussions about which one of the victims will be killed first. When you have a pair of lively teenage bimbolinas bound hand and foot and ready for a session with the skinning knife, neither one of the little devils wants to be the one to go first. And they don't mind telling you quickly why their best friend should be the one to die. So, yeah, that's pretty freaking intense. Now, killer fiction, you can look it up. It's G.J. Schaefer is the credited author, but we all know who it is. You can read the book. It has some of his artwork and some of his stories. Now, I will tell you with 100% certainty, I am not telling you to go out and read this book. It is probably the most disturbing thing I have ever read. Now, back to Sandra London. Okay. Sandra London was actually threatened by Gerard John Schaefer because she started writing true crime because it was everywhere, especially after Ted Bundy was apprehended in Florida. Yeah, we're getting there. But Schaefer sued several true crime authors, including Sandra London and Robert Ressler, for identifying him as a serial killer. Now, the interesting thing is he admitted to being a serial killer, in the same vein as Richard Cottingham. I did this, I did that. No, I didn't do this. No, you misunderstood what I said. But the funny one about Robert Ressler is because he was only convicted of killing 2 people. So he couldn't possibly be a serial killer under that. The evidence used against him was over 500 handwritten pages that Sandra London delivered to the court, basically with Schaefer confessing everything. Interestingly enough, at this time, Sandra London takes notice of the Gainesville Ripper, who is also in prison with Gerard John Schaefer. And they start a relationship, ends up becoming his fiance. And this is why Sandra London became a controversial figure. A lot of people believe that Sandra London was exploiting her relationship with Schaefer and Rawlins for profit. so that because she knew that they couldn't profit off of their stories, but she could as a writer and having direct access to these two individuals. And so I will say this in Sandra London's defense. I've read Danny Rowland's book. I've read Gerard John Schaefer's book. Sorry, part of that was part of my medical condition, and part of that was just I got a case of the ickies from thinking about some of the stories I've read. Uh, it took me a long while to finish that book. I'm a pretty avid reader, and I can get through a book fairly quick. Um, yeah, that one took me a while to get through, and I'll just leave it at that. So, at one time, the Florida Penitentiary housed three notorious inmates: Gerard John Schaefer, Ted Bundy, and Danny Rowlands. Now, Terry, you asked how come you'd never heard of Gerard John Schaefer? Well, it's because Ted Bundy was incarcerated right there with him. Now, keep in mind, we're just starting to learn the level of Schaefer's depravity. Like it was constantly continuing, and you have the guy who, for lack of a better term, he's a schlub. And you look at him, and there is nothing mesmerizing, charismatic, anything about him. Where you compare him to Ted Bundy, and here you have this upwardly mobile, college educated, had gone to law school, escaped custody twice, and now he's in Florida, where he attacked a sorority house, killing two of the sorority members, and then horrifically killing a 12-year-old girl, Kimberly Leach. And just a quick thing about Ted Bundy. Ted Bundy's time in Florida was when a serial killer devolves. And this devolvement is everything that they have used to avoid apprehension and capture is now out the window. And they're almost in a manic phase where they are compelled to kill as many people as they can in the shortest period of time. This makes them very sloppy. It makes them, in some ways, very unpredictable, but in some cases, you could set your watch to what's going to happen. So Ted Bundy gets put into prison, and all this information comes out about him being a necrophile, and there are victims that they'll never find, and he's the most notorious serial killer in America. And of course, this ticks off Schaefer because he was on the verge of being the biggest deal. And now hardly anybody wants to talk to him. Well, I take that back. The FBI wanted to talk to Schaefer a lot. A lot of what we know about sexual sadist serial killers is because of the interviews that were done with Gerard John Schaefer. I'm sure the FBI agents interviewing him had to sit through just hours and hours of absolute nonsense and dribble before they got it to anything useful. Now, Ted Bundy never really gave Schaefer a thought because he was a nobody. He was beneath him, and Schaefer saw himself as being better because a prosecutor referred to him as making Ted Bundy look like a Boy Scout. And given the crime scene photos between the two, I don't think that's a disingenuous characterization of Schaefer. Wow, that's a lot of big words right there. Way to put that master's degree to use, sir. Good job. But when you think of what Bundy was able to do and the mythos around Bundy, he overshadowed Schaefer in just about every aspect. Okay. Um, in 1995, Schaefer meets his ultimate end when he is brutally beaten and stabbed to death. Uh, he had cracked ribs. He was stabbed to the point where the FBI would consider it overkill, over 20 stab wounds. Uh, some descriptions even say that one of his eyes had either been obliterated, was hanging out, or was missing. So he came to his very logical end. And like I said earlier in the beginning of the video, I think that was brought about because he was cooperating with law enforcement. He actually ended up trading photos with law enforcement's help and actually helped bring down a child pornography ring uh, going as far as Seattle. So that's Gerard John Schaefer. That wraps him up. All right. I thought we were going to make this six episodes, but we got it in five. Uh, y'all, Gerard John Schaefer. Probably one of the most underrated and underrated most most unstudied serial killers, because there's still stuff coming out about him, and he was overshadowed by Danny Rollins and also with Ted Bundy. And so we may never know. I think we confirmed 5 victims that he actually killed, and we know of at least 2 abductions. Or I'm sorry, we know 2 of his victims were able to get away from him, but who knows how many other victims are out there. Y'all, this has been great. I've enjoyed talking about Gerard John Schaefer. He's a fascinating case study, but if you got a little case of the icks right now, I don't blame you, because uh, if I was going to do a Mount Rushmore of bad guys, he would certainly be on it. He is one of the most deviant serial killers I know about. Um, so, y'all, thank you so much for joining me on this edition of Serial Killer Saturdays, talking about Gerard John Schaefer. I'm Derek Judd, the Cowboy Criminologist. Y'all, please like, subscribe, and share this on your favorite social media platforms. Be sure to join me next week. We're going to talk about Gary Heidnik. And yeah, it's going to be a good one. So, y'all stay safe. Enjoy your weekend. Take care.